We have 6 games today, so we can just get started immediately. All right, so here we have Blue Mamba's game. We want to take a look at this, and yeah, this should be interesting. It's kind of interesting. I was just sort of looking at some Sicilian opening lines, and I sort of wanted to determine the difference between the hyper accelerated dragon and the regular dragon. I think just any move that has G6 on move 2 is Sicilian hyper accelerated dragon. I didn't realize actually that it was that narrow, to be completely honest. So this was kind of interesting. I learned a lot from doing this stream. I actually, there's so many things that, like, especially in openings that I never played, like, I get the opportunity to learn a lot of different, like, I get a lot, the opportunity to learn a lot of different pieces of the game that I wouldn't learn otherwise, just because everyone plays in sort of different ways, so openings especially, I guess I probably knew that hyper accelerated dragon started with G6 on move 2, but yeah, I realized that that's what the designation is. Like, it's literally that. I thought it could be later and still be the accelerated dragon, but anyways, hyper accelerated dragon in this game, bishop c4, d6. Bishop c4, we've talked about this move a lot as a move in the Sicilian. It's basically weaker if e5 hasn't been played. If e5 has been played, then bishop to c4 is a great move. But if e6 can be played, bishop c4 doesn't quite carry the same amount of weight as it does otherwise. Looking at this game, White still got the edge after bishop c4. But bishop c4 I think was not the best play. If you look at the opening theory book, bishop c4 is fairly far down the list. More common, opening the Sicilian with d4, c3 setting up d4 with an Alapin structure, c4, which is kind of interesting. This sort of translates into a more, I guess you would say, probably English-style game. d4 will still get played. It'll probably turn into Maroczy bind Sicilian, most likely, but kind of interesting with White having an early c4. Looking at more of this, knight c3 is also playable. So bishop c4 is playable, but fairly far down the list. More common than g3, which I guess sort of makes sense. Basically g3 after knight to f3 is not as valuable as g3 without knight f3 having been played. All right. On to the next part, bishop c4, bishop g7, c3, supporting this push on d4 that's coming. E6, d4, pawn takes, pawn takes. This is up to White. Here, I guess I would say that, I don't know, knight takes d4 seems to be more common. I'm sort of curious about this. If you've managed to play c3, then playing knight takes d4 doesn't make as much sense in that context, right? Like, I would figure that if you've played c3, you would want to play pawn takes d4. But, I don't know. Let's compare the relative values on the eval. C takes d4 seems to be slightly better than knight takes d4. Knight takes d4 leads to 0.32. C takes d4 leads to 0.45. So overall, objectively better is pawn takes d4 here. I also just think from a fundamental perspective, if you've bothered to play c3, you probably should want to play pawn takes d4 and maintain the big center for White here. These openings are interesting. Basically you have a situation in which you're going to get a similarly placed rook placed on c1 facing rook on c8. And I like it generally. I think that basically this ends up in a good situation for White. Bishop c4 is somewhat awkwardly placed, but you might actually be able to challenge with it with a move like d5. The main issue with the bishop c4 is it continues to basically face f7 and e6 on this long diagonal, and that diagonal that basically disrupts this bishop on that diagonal. The bishop would have more mobility on probably e2 as its highest mobility square. Here, it's facing off against d5 almost immediately. Anyways, bishop's on c4 for now. Probably rook to c1 to be played later in that sideline. d6, d4, pawn takes, queen takes. Cool. Now White's got a big developmental advantage, but Black can potentially chase it with knight to c6. Knight to c6 faces off against bishop to b5. Yep, bishop b5, cool. Queen a5. And overall, this sort of trade, this I think ends up being fairly good for black. So bishop to c4 is not considered to be the best move. Queen a5 will provide a resource to break this pin. Sacrificing this queen for that bishop, works because you can play knight takes queen after the bishop is taken. So yeah. Overall here, I think this trade ends up being good for black. But let's take a look. Queen a5. And I just also want to take a look at the opening book here. All right, so we're slightly out of the opening book, probably because of the e5 move. Queen a5, knight c3, queen takes, knight takes, knight takes. And yeah, we're about equal, right? This minus 0.82 looks reasonably good for black. I think pawn takes e5 can be played potentially, but black's looking good. The reasons why black is looking good in this situation, this is important. This is sort of important to recognize. Black has the bishop pair, and he has two very good placed files for his rook. This open D file and this open C file could be very helpful to black's rook here. If pawn takes e5, then knight takes e5, and then rook can go to e8 and d8, and basically, have great mobility, great control over the situation, and then black can end up, introducing his bishops into the game and having just a really solid situation there. D takes e5, knight takes, bishop f5. This, I think, is an error. Bishop f5 doesn't seem exactly right to me. I think this gives white an opportunity to take and double black's pawns. There's a lot of value in having the double bishop pair here. I think what I would do, I think moving your bishop pair forward is a good idea. Coming up with a tactical resource stemming from the strength of your minor pieces is a good idea. But I think I would play something like bishop to g7 first, and then maybe knight to d7. But overall, I guess I would just say, bishop to g7, castles, rook d8, and black is looking pretty solid here. So bishop f5, I think, is an error. Instead, probably bishop to g7, castles. There's no reason to really, it's not a very effective threat is my main criticism, right? Because if bishop to f5 is played, then you are threatening c2, but I don't think threatening c2 is an extremely valuable concept in isolation. I think, knight takes f5, pawn takes f5, cool, but basically here, this isn't like it's a great... this isn't a great attack if it can just be neutralized by white immediately with a worsening pawn structure for black. Bishop to g7 instead, I like better. That's a straightforward development. Then you can castle, play rook d8. Makes sense. So pawn takes, knight e4, bishop g7, and basically threats on d2. But I guess my main problem with this opening in general is, or this move in general is it's trading off the bishop in a situation where white can take it and worsen the pawns. It just provides too good of an opportunity for white. Bishop g7 is a straightforward developing move. After bishop g7, castles, and rook d8, and you can force this knight off of that file. Then you can play bishop to f5. This is just not that. In my opinion, it's just not that good an idea. So anyways, continuing on, black plays it, worsens his pawn structure, matches white on the minor pieces, and now, this advantage, which had been, not big, but almost a pawn, minus 0.66 is turned back into equality. All right, castles queenside, knight c5, knight takes is kind of interesting. I would probably play knight takes here. I know the engine's saying it's a mistake, but it makes sense to me. I mean, I would say rook, white's going to be pressing on black here. So, knight to c5, knight takes, bishop f6, and doubling on the, hey, welcome, Woe! Thanks very much for joining the stream. Yeah, so rook to d7 here is a big difference. Rook to d7, rook to e8, but basically white's going to win a pawn. So this has basically turned into a good situation for black in which there weren't many vulnerabilities. I think black's situation. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, right. You're absolutely right about that. So let's take a look at the schedule. I think, did I forget to post the schedules? Yes, you're absolutely right. I forgot to post the schedules. So the games this morning, I can read off really quickly. Uh, uh, the next game is Ansh's game. The game after that is Limestone's game. The game after that is Cernox versus Anger. The game after that is Spotkins' game, and the game after that is Gecko's game. So what's your username that you sent it under, Wosa? I should send out the schedules now. You're absolutely right about that. Um, okay, cool. Yeah. Sorry about that, Cernox. Yeah, I'm just switching stuff around. But yeah, your game should start in about 45 minutes. No, sorry. It's Cernox versus Anger. It's yeah, Gecko's game is here. Sorry about that. I forgot to do the schedules. That was a mistake. But yeah, I'll get that schedule. I'll get the schedule sent out. After this stream. At least I'll get the next 3 lessons right. Anyways, thank you all for bearing with me through this change in schedule. I appreciate it. It will be better organized pretty soon. But thanks for catching that. Actually, my fault. Okay. Anyways, looking at Blue Mama's game, the changes here, I think basically this trade-off is good for black, but this move bishop f5 is not good for black. Doubling this pawns, this pawn on f5, bishop to d2, knight to e4, is yeah, basically this is, this opportunity, this was a mistake for black. You're playing your bishop to a square where it can be taken, and one of your key advantages is having doubled, or basically doubled bishops against the doubled knights. So giving that up for no reason seems like an error for black. It'll be a bigger endgame advantage to not do it that way. Bishop over, cool, a6. And basically, yeah, bishop takes c5. Now, black is sort of struggling, unfortunately. Black basically has to decide how to deal with this threat on his pawns, which are very likely to be lost here. I guess I would say bishop f6 could potentially work. Bishop f6 is probably the best try, but still on rook to d7, the b6 pawn, or the b7 pawn is hanging. So rook takes b7, and white's just sort of better. Getting those rooks off was good for black, but again, this is going to be tricky. Now black's forced to play. Well, this was great. This was a big error for white. Basically here, black's playing a probably likely losing endgame down a pawn. But here with bishop to d6, white eliminates most of, one of his biggest advantages. So yeah, that was an error for black, or for white, sorry. Now white's back to being up, and yeah, okay, so anyways, in terms of looking at this game, there's multiple hung pawns, multiple kind of situational errors, I think, here for black. So pawn takes, queen takes, knight f6, knight c6, and this trade is good for black, so this was all good. I don't see any problems for black's play other than this so far. I think basically e5 was probably an overextension by white. In terms of looking at this opening book, e5 is one of the lines, so maybe it's fine. But I feel like knight to c6 here causes white some serious problems. After this full trade-off, basically the position's slightly better for black. So I like the way the black has played up until bishop f5. Bishop f5 is the one strategic improvement that I would make in this game. I would not play bishop f5 here. I don't think this is the right line. I think the right line here is like bishop to g7, which develops in a straightforward way. Hold on to the bishop pair if you can. There's no reason to give up the bishop pair and worsen your pawn structure. So this is the move number 11 I would replace for black. And then, yeah, overall, this bishop takes c5, this very quickly turns into a good situation for white. So the engine's pointing towards a few different improvements here. It's pointing towards e6. E6 makes sense because then, the fork by the rook isn't available. I'm wondering if queenside castling might be okay here. This looks a little bit double-edged. This looks like it could bring in some king safety issues. but White's never going to bring in any attacking force on the C file. This is basically blocked by the C2 pawn, so it would be a really difficult thing for White to start attacking Black on the open C file. Maybe castling's better here, but the issue with castling falls to a tactical inaccuracy, or a tactical move for White. With knight to c5, basically, pressure is going to start to be able to be exerted on the e7 and b7. With knight takes, which is another error, bishop takes and pawn falls for Black. So I guess in terms of improving this situation, probably b5 is the most straightforward way to do it. b5 and Black at least doesn't get the tactical, or Black will still get a very powerful rook to c7 rook, but he's not going to be able to he's not going to be able to win material directly like he does with knight takes c5. Knight takes c5, knight takes c5. So yeah, so in terms of improvements in this game, bishop f5 was an error for Black. I think knight takes c5 was another error for Black. Paying more attention to the power of the rook on the 7th rank is important here. b5 and basically White should be in good shape. Rook e8, rook takes, and basically Black's in a rough endgame. There are multiple tactical endgame errors here. I think that it's important to kind of take a look at the one-move tactics that are available. A lot of hanging pawns. Here, there's a better tactical resource, king to e6. With king to e6, you're threatening this bishop. It basically forces c2, or c7, sorry. c7, king d7, and then king d4. So the king's going to try to exert pressure on this pawn. It may already, unfortunately, be lost for Black, but I think you can kind of make a better chance at this with bishop to g1, king e5, h5. At least this is a more complicated endgame. Unfortunately, it's probably already lost for Black. So just trading into the pawn down bishop endgame, I think, may just be lost for Black. It's a pretty tightly played game. There's not a huge amount of tactical volatility, and I think just losing this pawn may have been too much for Black already. So I think that the real changes here stem from looking at bishop to basically bishop to f5. I think was an error, giving up the bishop pair for no reason. The next error was playing basically playing knight takes c4, which allows this pawn winning tactic. It's a simplified enough endgame that losing this pawn, I think, is bad for losing this pawn just is bad for Black. It's going to lead to a bad situation for Black. So knight takes c5 here, as opposed to playing b5, which at least there will still be positional disadvantages for Black here, but at least he won't lose the pawn immediately. This b5 is an improvement. So in going through this game, 2 takeaways, 2 improvements. I think all of this opening was fine. I think this queen takes b5 tactic was a good idea. It seemed to give a better position to Black. But bishop f5 was the move that I would correct here. You have one of your key advantages in this position is the bishop pair, and giving up the bishop for a knight in a situation that worsens your pawn structure. That's just an error when you have the straightforward developing moves that you couldn't make instead. That's an error. Knight takes c5 is a different error that allows White to win a pawn by force. So overall, those are the 2 improvements that I'd look at and make, and yeah, interesting situation. But those errors are 2 that I think Black would do well by correcting. So yeah, interesting situation. Thank you very much for sending the game, Blue Mamba. And bishop takes f5 and knight takes c5. One for positional reasons and one for tactical reasons are the 2 moves that I changed from this game. All right, on to the next one. On to the next game. It is next game is Ansh's game. Ansh is playing Franksa. Let's take a look. All right, let's take a look. So this is Ansh's game. Let's take it from his perspective. Ansh's game, Ansh is playing Black. He plays queen's pawn opening. Okay, cool. I like this. This is the Slav. Slav, I think, is always solid. This is a solid way to play, play d4 as black. Bishop to g4, e6, h3. And, yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I think white's got a solid advantage here, but I really like this pawn structure for black. I think this holds up very well against queen's pawn games. Bishop to h5, bishop e2, bishop takes, bishop e7. And overall, I think white's just, white's got the initiative, but I'm not a huge fan of b3 here. I think b3 restricts the queen's kind of most natural developing squares. b3 can often be played with threats. Queen a4 can often be played by threats, and b3 is deflecting that queen on c2. Castles, bishop b2, a5, castles, knight d7, e4. Okay, so now white is challenging black's pawn structure. This is a situation where I think you may have to give up that strong d5 pawn. Knight takes, d takes, bishop takes. And I think black is looking pretty solid here. I think this is black's best opportunity. He's facing off against good bishops for white, but I don't think white has any immediate tactical breaks. f5 is interesting. That weakens white on the white squared bishop file, but it does strengthen the opportunities for this bishop on b2. d5 also becomes a threat, that's more powerful because it now comes with an open diagonal on the king. So overall, that's something to think about. So yeah, in terms of the way that black has played this game, I wouldn't be surprised if we're still in opening book here. We may not be, but yeah, so it's not in the opening book anymore. But pawn takes e5, bishop takes e5, and then probably knight f6. But overall here, I think white is up by about half a pawn. Looks pretty solid, and knight f6 can be played. Knight f6, threats on b6, threats of bishop to b4. Overall, I'm thinking black is basically good, but f5 I think is the f5 may be f5 may be an error here. I think a natural move is knight to f6. Let's see how this plays. Knight to f6 is fine. Engine is suggesting queen to b6, queen to c7, bishop to f6. Bishop to f6 is kind of interesting. Bishop to f6 challenges white's fianchetto bishop. I actually sort of like bishop to f6 now. Bishop to f6 facing off against bishop to b2. That makes sense. Having this kind of matching symmetrical bishops, I like this general idea. I think this could be an interesting way for black to play this. Obviously, one of the biggest disadvantages for black in this situation is running opposite colored bishops against each other. This bishop facing off against this bishop should be reasonably good for black. So, yeah, interesting. The thing about f5, so f5 makes an immediate challenge to white, and it forces white off of this square, but I think that it weakens black's pawn structure too much. The issue, so far, Anch, I really like the game that you've played. It makes a lot of sense to me. I think I think you picked the right moment to get rid of that d5 pawn. I think I have no problems with you trading off the d5 pawn for the e4 pawn there. I think it's great. Yeah, it was the best use of that resource at that time, and you still have this part of that pawn structure, which is pretty solid. But I think knight f6 here is a better way to go about it. f5 creates this backwards pawn on the e file, so knight f6 here, and you have no vulnerabilities on e6. You open up an open file on the d4 pawn, which isn't defended by any other pawn. So I think knight f6, bishop f6 were the way to go. f5 creates this backwards pawn on the open file for this that will become a target for white to attack. That's why I would not play f5 here. It's an interesting idea, but I think that you have, and I think pawn takes e4. I think you made a great judgment call in terms of when to trade off the d5 for the e4 pawn. But bishop f6 I think is the move. Bishop f6 facing off against a1. That's the play. f5 creates a new vulnerability for black. So yeah, so that's I think other than that, every move that you've played in this opening so far has made sense to me. You made a great judgment call in not trading off the c pawns. Trading off this d pawn for the e pawn makes complete sense. And just in terms of pawn structure play, that's what makes f5 not the move to play here. A developing move like bishop f6 looks awkward, but is solid. Facing off white's bishop against your bishop is a good idea. And if these bishops trade, that's going to be good for you that's going to be good for you as black. Yeah, basically, white's key advantage is having the bishop pair. If you can trade off bishops, it's a bishop versus a knight, and that's a much less pronounced advantage for white. So that's the improvement that I'd make in this game. Bishop f6 as opposed to f5. f5 makes the e6 pawn backwards and creates a new vulnerability for you. f5, c5, bishop f6, cool, great. You played it really well. Like bishop f6 facing off against bishop b2 is exactly the right idea. It's what I was talking about instead. And then you trade off. I like this a lot. Like I basically like the way that this was played. You end up trading off the weak e6 pawn for the strong d5 pawn. White didn't have to do that. White could have just kept the pawn structure there. But yeah, I don't really like d5 for white here, to be completely honest. This trades off your weakest pawn for white's strongest pawn, or at least white's strong pawn for white. So yeah, I think black, basically, you're going to have to watch out for tactics here. You're going to have to watch out for the strong rook on that open file. But in general, even though the eval isn't really favoring this, I think the simplification of the situation for black here was actually really good. You traded off a bad pawn for a good pawn, and you traded off bishops. So now, white no longer has a bishop pair. Rook at e7. Rook e7 is intuitive. This all sort of makes sense. Yeah, I feel like the eval is being a little bit generous towards white here. I like the way that black has played this. Here, I think I'd play rook f7. Yeah, so these tactics are interesting. Yeah, so see, this flip doesn't surprise me at all. Basically, the flip towards equality here. Like, when I'm looking at this eval for white, I'm feeling like it's an overestimate. I think this simplification was good. The eval's not necessarily suggesting it. It really surprises me that this eval is so good for white. I think that trading off the bishops and trading off the d-pawn for the e-pawn, I can't see how that's possibly bad for black. I think there's probably some tactics involving open files that are getting weighted pretty heavily by white, or weighted pretty heavily for white. I'm sort of wondering about rook f7 here too, as being better than rook to d8. But I think the simplification here was a great idea. I have no problems with that simplification. This all trades off. Yeah, I think black basically secured equality here. I think that all those trades, that simplification was really a good plan. So yeah, nice. Okay, so cool. Yeah, this really makes a lot of sense, Anch, and now you're basically getting a way more active king, which is important. I wouldn't have played king f. I think that king f6 here was an error. I think that here you're in great shape, and after king f6, I don't think that helps you in any way. So I think that's an endgame error. I'd play king to e5. I know that black's about to challenge you with, if you play king f5, then black's going to challenge you with h4. But just g takes h4 and trading off the double, you basically traded off a doubled pawn, the pawn on g5 for the h pawn. That was the end impact of this. So I think that trade was good for black. Basically, you have to be careful here, but I like black's situation a lot. So this I think was the error. This swings the game by 9 points. So this was the error. If you play king to d4 or king to d5 here, you basically are able to. I think you might be able to queen this pawn. So king there, king there, king there, king there, king there, and the king is outside of the pawn square, right? So this pawn's gonna, this pawn's gonna queen. So this is just a king and pawn endgame error. On f4, move the king to d5, and the king can never take h4 because the pawn will queen. This one's really just about counting, But yeah, if you play king d4 here, this ends up being a win for black as opposed to for white. So this unfortunately is an endgame blunder. I saw chess.com just released an endgame tactics trainer. I haven't had a chance to use it yet. It might be helpful in situations like this. It might not be. Not sure, but I'm interested. I'm going to try it in the next couple days just to see. Endgame tactics seem like a great opportunity, to be honest. So yeah. King to d5 as opposed to king to c3 here. And black basically queens this pawn. So in terms of improvements for black, I think black's opening was good. The errors were, in my opinion, knight takes e4, pawn takes e4. This was a great play by black. The error was f5, which creates this weakness on e6. I would play a developing move like bishop f6 to match the bishop on f2, or sorry, the bishop on b2 for the diagonal. And yeah, with d5, I'm not a huge fan of. I think d5 pushes trading the d pawn, which is strong, for the e6 pawn, which is the vulnerability in black's situation. You simplify everything, and this position basically simplifies to equality. I like this a lot for black. Now, it's very unclear who's winning. It's about equal. Black gets a more active king, and I like your situation. In terms of king and pawn endgame play, I do think there were a few errors made here. So I think that king f6 here was not the right play. I think with g5, you don't have to worry about h4 that much. H4 challenges g5, but you can just take it, and at least for the short term, your pawns will be equal, and you've undoubled your doubled pawns. So h4 really strengthens the g pawns a lot. For that reason, I would play king to d4 and continue activating your king. Don't worry about h4 here; that's not a problem. And then the most decisive improvement in this game for black is just counting this one out. You actually can play king to d4 here and successfully queen the c pawn if white takes the h4 pawn. If white doesn't take the h4 pawn, you can advance these two pawns simultaneously. But you actually had an endgame win here. This was just about counting out the pawn moves, but on king takes, you actually are able to queen the pawn. So king to c3, I think, is not the correct move here. King d5, and you win as black. Overall, Anch, I think there's a lot of things that you did right in this game, which is kind of a bummer. King d4, and I think you're pretty much dead one as black. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think this is just a king and pawn endgame error. I haven't checked out chess.com's endgame trainer. Super curious about that, to be completely honest. I'll take a look probably today or tomorrow. But yeah, that's my suggestion, and yeah, I like it. I think that's an improvement for black, and thank you very much for sending the game. As always, always appreciate your game. I hope it's helpful to take a look at the stream, and yeah, thanks very much for sending it. All right, here's Limestone's game. Woe says game is next, but yeah, so Limestone opens the game with the ready with d4. And now you're in you're in a favorable queen's pawn game. I think the Zuckertort is generally good for white. Black's lost a key resource for undermining or for defending or attacking the d4 pawn. And Zuckertort variation here, d4 is white's looking fine. I like this as white. Ideas for white can include c4. What's valuable about c4 is that it challenges the d5 pawn, and the only defensive move for black is e6, putting it into the Queen's Gambit orthodox. Bishop g5 is fine. In this opening, c4 is the most common. c4, g3, and bishop to f4 are considered to be the most popular moves. Bishop f4 I like more than bishop g5 as a general principle. I think bishop f4 and London-related systems tend to be very strong for white. I think the computers indicated that they're objectively very strong. So I always like the London systems. I think that they're fine, very solid openings for white. They fit into kind of my style of play, to be honest. We added a lecture in 2 days from now about opening play for specific opening styles, and the London just really fits into kind of what I like to do. My personal style of play is basically just to play extremely solid openings openings that aren't that are equal but not particularly exciting. And then just outplay your opponent in the middle game. That's always what my strategy has been. My strategy has just been, get your tactical play to be extremely strong, get your get your positional play to be as strong as possible, and just play openings that won't lead to traps and won't steer you wrong, basically. Just play, so that's just my style. My opening play style is just play into equal middle games where you can turn it into a chess game and then just be better on the fundamental skills than your opponent. That's always what my approach has been, and that so I gravitate towards moves like the London system, which offers you a slight sustained advantage for white and the opportunity to play a middle game that's interesting. So I would say bishop f4 over bishop to g5. Bishop to g5 is fine. I'm sure this is a playable opening move. I just stylistically prefer bishop f4 to bishop to g5. Knight f6, bishop takes. I don't know. Bishop takes is seems like an oversimplification to me, but it's fine. It worsens black's pawn structure, so you're getting some compensation. It just seems to, in my opinion, it just sort of gives up the bishop pair a little bit easily here. E3, you're fine. All of this is fine. Yeah, this all makes sort of intuitive sense to me. Castles as opposed to E3, again, fine. You're developing a pawn. I like it. Queen takes, G takes, F5, Rook C1, and yeah, now as white, you're in sort of a double-edged position. Bishop takes F3 was generally double-edged for white here. G takes, F5, and then King to H1, Rook to G1. And overall here, I think white is looking, fairly solid. Queen E2 could be valuable. Bishop E2 could be valuable. Rook to G1 is a tactical error, but I think thematically correct. You've opened up this file, and basically, it's going to take black a really long time to get supporting pieces to attack you on H2. I don't think an attack for black on this open king side is ever going to really materialize. I actually think bishop to H3, we'll take a look at the eval here. It shifts the position slightly towards black, but I think that the attacking chances for black are weak enough on the king side that you can just play queen E2 or bishop E2, and then play rook G1, and have a great kingside attack. So here the engine's suggesting bishop E2 with rook G1, rook G3, and rook H1. I'm sure, as an acceptable possibility for the continuation of white's attack. This is very double-edged. This queen, since it's not successfully attacking, is actually displaced on the H file. So bishop takes F3, I think, is not materializing as a good idea for black. This ends up being an error. Basically, this is a tactical error for white. But the thematic idea here actually is to just defend the pawn and then start your attack. You see the attacking chances. You see this open file on the black king side and the double-edgedness of this open file. So yeah, there's no reason to be too reckless about it. You can play queen E2 first and then play the rooks over and have a fine attack. So that's an improvement for white here. I think that's an error for white, or an error for white. Then black hangs his knight. After this, I can't imagine this game becoming more competitive. Yeah, white just wins. Awesome. Nice. Good job by white, winning this game. Cool. So yeah, the basically black's played this opening. Knight c6 against the ready transfers into a pretty, the Chigorin variation, which I don't really like. I would consider bishop f4 over bishop to g5, but that's a style thing. And then, basically, bishop takes f3 was surprisingly double-edged. And other than this error here, this error, just giving up the f3 pawn for nothing, white's got a good position here. This is a good eval, plus 1.1, 1.1 positional advantage. Queen e2 is just fine. No reason to just give up this pawn for free. So I think this was the error for white. All the other moves in this game sort of made sense for me. This one also makes sense for me from a thematic perspective, but queen e2 holding the f3 pawn is really much better. This ends up being basically being much better for white. So Yeah, here I think that's really the improvement. Uh, White played an accurate game. Let's look at the evals. I'm surprised that it's this low, to be honest. It felt like a pretty well played game to me. But yeah, defense on the E3 on the F3 square was the improvement that I'd make for White, and then you can play Rook G1. Other than that, I have very little in the way of improvements for White. I think White played this game just fine. You know, Bishop takes f3 was kind of a superficial move. It does look good to open up the king side, but it's double-edged, and you have tactical. You have tactical improvements. Rook to c1 maybe was a little bit inefficient. Maybe f4 is better here, but there's no reason to give up the f3 pawn. That was the biggest error, really the only error that I see for White in this game. I'm sort of curious, just because we can, and just because we have a few extra minutes. Let's take a look. Here's this thing that I've been that I've been considering, which is let's take a look at the PGN here. So I want to look at the PGN and see how much of the inaccuracy of this game came from before the game was decided. Because I think that White plays actually a very accurate game up until move 18. So let's say if the game ends at move 18, what the accuracy is. Because I'm thinking that the accuracy score here, 87.2, is getting weighted down by, it's getting weighted down by, inaccurate play after the game was already decided. I like computers and computer analysis, so I have kind of a bias here. But I'm thinking, like, let's just take a look at this to 18b6. And what's the eval for this position? Because I feel like White's played pretty accurately. The only error that I see is giving up f3 for no reason. I'm guessing that the eval up to move 18 is higher. And let's take a look. Nope, I was wrong. So anyways, interesting. Yeah, so I like this game better. I think up until the knight was hung, I thought this was just fine for White. The computer seems to disagree. I think it was just fine for White. The error was allowing pawn takes f3, and I think if you just play queen e2, rook g1, you get the same thematic idea in, and don't have any issues. Still surprised by the accuracy because I don't really see much in terms of improvement for White. A lot of moves just seem to make sense. I guess there were multiple moves that were excellent as opposed to best, but honestly, I'm fine with this. I'm fine with the way that White played this opening. Queen g5, king h1, queen h5, and then queen e2, and then rook g1, and you get to advance the same plan that you had before. Just letting this pawn go for nothing is a little bit premature. That's really my only argument. Bishop e2 also is what the engine's suggesting. Maybe bishop to e2 is a little better than queen to e2. On queen to e2, yeah, okay, so it prefers bishop to e2 to queen to e2. Okay, sure. But defend the f3 pawn, because you can. And then play rook g1, rook g2, and then, the attacking file is very double-edged. I think you get a better position as White than Black gets out of it. So, anyways, very interesting situation. Thank you very much for sending that game, Limestone. And please keep sending them. Really appreciate you sending the game. I think you played this one well. The only improvement that I would say is, no, I mean, not at all, Woe. Here's the thing. Every game is instructional. I just want to explain kind of the situation with lower-rated games. Never feel afraid to send... never feel afraid to send games. Whatever it is, I'm super happy to look at it. I'm very happy that you're joining the stream, and I'm about to change the format of the stream anyways. So 600 rated games, I'm always happy to look at. And to be honest, I'm about to switch the breakdown from about an hour and 15 minutes of games and 15 minutes of lecture to about 45 minutes of lecture and 45 minutes of games. So I'm really happy to have you here. I think you could gain a lot both from sending games in and also from the new format, which is going to involve a lot more lecture time and a lot more lessons. So yeah, I really appreciate you being here, and please feel free to send games in. Every game has instructional components. The main thing sending in games. No, of course, whoa. And honestly, I'm really happy to do it. I think chess lessons should be free. I think it's unfair, the system that we have now, where basically if you have financial resources to pay for lessons, you get to be a better chess player. That seems really unfair. So I'm really happy to do free lessons. I think this idea is going to work, and I think other people will start giving free lessons, and I think that paid lessons will go away basically. So anyways, really happy to have you here. And please don't be afraid to send games. I'm super happy to look them over. The one thing that I want to explain, just in terms of my ability to look over, games, is the thing is, at this point, myself, as a national master, and even up to the grandmaster level, we aren't as good as the computer. We aren't as good as basically any top-level computer. The Chess.com computer is better than everybody in the world except maybe Magnus Carlsen. Like, every person is, much worse than all of the computers. So my point on that is basically, the thing about games, especially under about 1200 or so, is that they're decided by tactics almost all of the time. So, pretty much regardless of what, regardless of what the game actually is, I'm going to probably give you the same exact advice, which is to go to which is basically, I think the quickest way that you can improve is to go to a tactics trainer and do that for like an hour or two a day for a month or two. And it doesn't matter what tactics trainer. Chess.com has a great free one. Chess Tempo has a great free one. Chess.com has Puzzle Battle. Chess.com has Puzzle Rush. Chess.com has a new Endgames tactics trainer that I haven't tried yet. But my advice to you, without knowing the game, is that basically chess tactics are going to be, yes, it is just puzzles. Do 2 hours of puzzles a day for a month, and I would be very, honestly, like, I would be surprised if you were under 1,000. It really is that straightforward. I mean, I don't want to overstate, but like, you will absolutely improve, and I think you'll be surprised at how significantly you will improve if you just do chess puzzles a day on a computer trainer for like 1 to 2 hours a day for a month. If you just do puzzles, and just do puzzle after puzzle after puzzle, just like continuously do them, that's your quickest way to improve. I feel very strongly about this. Like, under 1200, your best way of improving is just chess puzzles. The percentage of games that are decided by tactics, and when I say tactics, what I mean is puzzles. But basically, doing chess tactics is your quickest way to improve if you're under 1200, for sure. There's no, like, it just is. It's not anything that a coach can teach you, so I don't think that it's promoted as a learning style. But it is absolutely the most efficient way that you can improve. You will be surprised. 1 to 2 hours of free tactics training a day, and you'll be in a very different place. I strongly believe that. I have a list of tactics trainers. I don't know if you're on the Discord, Woe. Here, I'll send you the link to the Discord. The Discord is here. This is my personal Discord for this stream. And it has a section on this Discord called Recommended Chess Resources. And on this Recommended Chess Resources, there's about 4 or 5 different tactics trainers. It doesn't matter which one you choose. The important thing to improve as quickly as possible is to just do it. It's like, it's not something that a coach can do or teach you. It's just something that you have to do. Every master has spent thousands of hours doing tactics training, whether they tell you that or not. So if you spend time on tactics training, that's going to be the quickest way that you improve. That's my personal chess Discord. I think it has a good list of resources there. And whichever one you want, I don't think you should have to pay for it. I think you should probably go to like Chess Tempo or Lee Chess or one of the free ones. They'll have good tactics trainers for you. And no, I really think that's the way to do it, Woe. I don't want to mislead you. So anyways, yeah, that's good. That's good. But the honestly, that's a really good question. I think that matters less, to be honest, than just doing them consistently. But if you're on that improvement path, that's really going to be great. It's not going to be something that I helped you with in any way. It's going to be something that you did for yourself. You will put in the time on the training. You will absolutely improve, and it'll work out. It'll work out, and your game will really improve. That's my thinking on that. Whoa. But yeah. That's the right idea. In terms of targeted training versus versus untargeted training, I guess I would say probably targeted training is maybe a little better, but at the same time, I would say first, I'm not so sure. I'm not nearly as sure about that as I'm sure about the fact that if you just consistently do puzzles for like a couple hours a day for a while, you will improve very quickly. So yeah, it's up to you on targeted or specific. I'm guessing targeted is probably better. I would probably do a mix. Like, if I were to guess, I'd probably say, 60 or 70% targeted, 30% untargeted. But yeah, it's much more important that you actually put the time in than what specifically than that specific. But yeah, for sure, it's like it's one of these things that drives me crazy. I think there's a lot of kind of game playing that goes on with the way that people teach chess. I can't teach you to do tactics, and yet it will absolutely be the fastest way that you improve. I have no interest in making money as a teacher, so I'm just telling you what I think is the best idea, and I'm very confident that getting from 600 to 1200 is almost all tactics based, because it's where your games are decided. If you're playing at under 1200 level, I'd say like 80 to 90% of your games are getting determined on tactical considerations. So yeah, that's where you want to spend your time studying. It's just not something that a teacher can teach, so there's no incentive for them to promote it as an idea. I have no, I think it's the right idea. I think it's the right idea, and I think that'll help you a lot. Yusupov, to be honest, I don't know the Yusupov courses. All I know about is, basically my evaluation is, on courses is whether or not they're free. If Yusupov courses are free, I know Yusupov is one of the highest level players there is. I'm sure they're good chess material. My question is, are they worth paying for? And the answer I would say is probably not. I think the thing about Yusupov courses is, is really the pricing thing, because there is free Grandmaster material available, and that's what you should focus on. But I'm sure Yusupov courses are good. I like Averbach for opening theory, but the thing about it is, under 2000, your training should be like very heavily weighted towards tactics. Even when you get to 2000, your training should be probably 50% tactics. It's not until you get to master level that you should be approaching, instructional material. It's really just putting the time in on tactics. You'll see great returns from that. But I'm sure Yusupov courses are good. There's a lot of good training, good material out there. The important thing is to make it, basically. I think that there's a lot of good resources available. So I don't know those ones, to be honest, El Gecko, but I think, at the rating level that you're at, tactics trainers are the way to go. Tactics, it is. I mean, there's a reason, the reason this week why that's the only emote is because I've been very busy and unable to upload the other emotes. Jen made some other very awesome emotes. I keep saying that I'm going to do them, and I keep forgetting about them. But yeah, no. Thanks for asking, Gecko. I'm sure that material is good, but your time spent on tactics is really, until you get to about 1800 to 2000, I would say, training almost exclusively tactics will be your quickest way to return. So yeah, thanks for asking, Gecko. I'm sure those courses are fine. If they're fun for you, then having more balanced training is cool. But in terms of quickest return on study, tactics training. So I have a bunch of resources on the Discord, tactics trainers. And the thing is, with a game, the thing about games at 600 level, I'm super happy to look them over, but they're going to be dominated by tactical considerations. So pretty much regardless of what the underlying game is, I'm just gonna end up reading out the engine output, as would any human in this situation. The computer engine output on tactical positions is better than the human input. Basically, the computer is better than any human at tactics. So I'm just gonna end up deferring to the computer in tactical positions. That's what pretty much every human is doing. So yeah. But always feel free to send in games. It's just like things like this, like I don't think that it's not super helpful for me to tell you that like C3 is just a tactical error, right? You have this bishop that's defended, so moving the defender away from the defense of this bishop is just a tactical mistake. That's fine. And everyone trappy openings, yeah. So the thing about it, Woe, is like, this is basically where the game is decided, right? Right. Yeah. No, and that's completely understandable, Woe. And I remember being at this point, well, like, under 1,000, like, these types of things happen all the time. And until you get the tactical, patterns, set in your brain, a really high percentage of games are decided on that. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right, Woe. That's how you do it. Send me on game submissions on Discord, and yeah, we have open slots as soon as May 24th. Yeah, thank you very much. Or no, sorry, maybe even May 23rd. I'll take a look. May 23rd evening or May 24th morning. Yeah, no worries. No, I forgot to update, or I forgot to send the schedule, Aphelion. So things are a little bit loose today. But thank you all very much for being here. In the game submission section, there's a thing that says game submissions, and it's the third one down, third text channel down. But yeah, thanks. Oh yeah, yours was the last one, Limestone. But it'll be, yeah. And also, always feel free to watch video on demand. I'm super happy to have you guys watch video on demand. Like, honestly, my goal is just to make chess lessons free. It's always nice to have you here because you can explain like exactly what you were thinking during your game analysis, and you can ask questions and stuff. But like, I'm never offended if you watch video on demand. Feel free I hope this schedule works for you, but if it's not, I'm not offended at all or anything. Feel free to watch video on demand. Video on demand is available for 14 days on Twitch, and it's available forever on YouTube. I'm also working with a few different Discords to try to, I'm working with a few different Discords to try to get them to put the lessons on their YouTubes forever as well. I just think free chess lessons should be absolutely everywhere, and I think we can successfully achieve that. Anyways, the question was, yeah, so the question was from End of a Circle. Really good question. How do you survive trappy openings? Honestly, my approach to this is just to sidestep them. There's two things, and this is sort of a really lame way to approach this problem. But I would play enough blitz games online, End of a Circle, to survive trappy openings. I would play enough games on, online that you see many of the traps that lower rated players will play against you. And if you ever run into a trappy opening, just do an analysis of it and then find the move that sidesteps the trappy opening. So like literally, like if your opponent played a trappy opening, your opponent caught you in this trap on blitz or whatever, and yeah, like Stafford. I mean, Stafford is not a objectively strong opening. But the thing is, I really think you can sidestep it pretty well. So the next time anyone loses to a trap opening, just open up the analysis engine on chess.com and just find the move where you could have sidestepped the trap. That's my thing. Like, I think it's kind of silly to spend as much time as your opponent. There are people who play trappy openings. I don't think it's a particularly useful style. I think instead of playing trappy openings, what you can do is, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not an objectively good opening. So I think if you play Stafford, you can just sort of, you can just sort of sidestep. You can just sort of sidestep it. If you lose against the Stafford, you can play it. If you lose against Stafford, you can play it back on the analysis engine. And but I don't think you should really be in the practice of learning trap openings as well as your opponents who regularly play trap openings. I think what you can do instead is just find a way to sidestep. Basically just find a way to sidestep the trappy opening. And with your way of sidestepping the trappy opening, you won't have to play against it. Then your opponent will actually be forced to play chess. And if you've done your tactics training, you've done your positional training, your underlying fundamental game should be better than your opponent who's playing trappy openings. And that's my suggestion there. Find something that sidesteps it and turns it into an actual chess game, and then have your chess playing fundamentals be way better than your opponent's. That's what worked for me at getting past the level where you play trappy openings. And the funniest thing about trappy openings is once you get to about 1800, 2000, 2200, for some reason they stopped playing trap openings against you. I actually think playing trappy openings against a master might be the best strategy. I think it's fundamentally incorrect to play objectively bad trappy openings, but I think that masters are the ones who don't really know them. I think they just find a way to sidestep them and forget about it. It's been years since I faced off against the Stafford. No one ever plays the Stafford against me, ever. I've never. It's been. I don't think anyone's played the Stafford against me ever, and if it was more than 5 years ago or so. They stop playing them against you. That's what's actually really funny. They just take the thing about it is I would sidestep the Stafford, and I think the Stafford might actually be weak enough that potentially, yeah. I mean, I'm not big into that. I think you just sidestep it into forcing your opponent to play a fundamentally based game as opposed to a trap based game. That's easier said than done. But the thing about trappy openings is I would just yeah, exactly. That's exactly right, Limestone. It sort of cracks me up because one of the funniest things that I've ever seen in terms of chess playing things that have happened is one time I saw a 2150 play a trap opening against a 2450, 2500, and just totally beat him with it badly. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I would just say, if you play a trappy opening and you lose to a trappy opening, there's no shame in that. The main thing is make sure you only fall into it once. Just find another way to sidestep that opening. You just don't want to be in the business of learning. In my opinion, you just don't want to be in the business of learning trappy openings as well as your opponents. That seems like an inefficient way to save time. So you can go through and learn all the refutations. I just don't think you have to. No one plays trap openings against me anymore, and if they do, they only trap me with it once, and then I do the analysis and stop playing that line. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's the right way to play it, but that's what's worked for me. The trappy openings are cool. They're fun. They can be fun surprise attacks. I don't want to be too dismissive, but I don't think they're a great fundamental way to play, to be completely honest. I think you want to play... My strategy was always just play something that's solid, force your opponent to play a chess game, and then once you're in a chess game, have better fundamentals and beat them that way. That's what makes the most sense to me. There are lots of people with different approaches, and that's fine too. But that's always what worked for me, and because that's what worked for me, that's why I have a bias. But yeah, the important thing is, play enough. If you really are worried about trap openings and they're getting played against you frequently, just basically go through your games in analysis and find the move to sidestep. I don't think it's worthwhile to go through and learn them. I never did that, to be honest. The 2450 in this the story that I'm talking about, basically, when this 2150 plays this 2450 in this trap opening and beats him badly in it, that's what I remember the most about these trap openings, is that masters don't necessarily know them super well. People stop playing them against them and forget. So I think they can actually be. I think trap openings can be a great surprise attack against high-level players. But in terms of learning how to actually play chess, I don't think it's that helpful. Um, so, anyways, we've diverged a lot. My class doesn't start until 10 a.m., so I'm sort of just chilling. I'm happy to go through this and take time to talk a little bit more. But yeah, this the main point for Woe is never feel worried about sending in games. The thing is, I can't be as I don't know how helpful I can be in them. The percentage of games below 1200 that is determined by tactics is like almost 100%. Like it's very, very high percentage. So the advice that I'm going to give is tactics. The decisive move, the decisive thing that was problematic for White in this situation was the bishop. Right? I mean, this all the other moves for White here. This bishop, basically getting hung on d3. That was the problematic part, and I don't think this is this this c3 here is sort of the biggest mistake that White makes in this game. Or I mean, with maybe other errors, but this mistake is one that should have. The volatility in this game, if you look at like a game report, these types of swings are reflective of tactical improvements, or the ability to make tactical improvements. So just like hanging the bishop with c3 here, this is something that goes away with experience and with playing this knight takes d3, king to d1. This ends up being pretty rough for this ends up being pretty rough for White. Anyways, knight d2, bishop a3. And overall here, I think White ends up in a pretty good situation. Black ends up in a good situation. It's just, I pay a lot of attention to the evals. The evals here, they change by about 5.75. That's enough to decide most games. So, really my recommendation here is just use the tactics trainer. Don't worry too much about this. It's just, I can't be that helpful. Masters can't be that helpful. Grandmasters can't be that helpful. The improvement here is something that the engine would tell you. I'm just not that, useful. This is the 4th game of the day. Yeah, and we can go through it. I mean, I can say this tactic's better than that tactic, but it's a highly tactical situation. At the end of this, I don't know. I mean, these, missing e4 here. This is something, playing rook to a2 and missing e4. This is something that happens, these things happen. They've happened to all of us at various points in chess. The point here is tactical play. Switch to a good tactics trainer. One of the tactics trainers that's recommended on the Discord, and I think your game will improve a lot and improve efficiently. These types of errors, the errors where most of the games that you're playing are getting decided, are tactical errors. So, always feel free to send these in, but just don't have the expectation of me being particularly helpful. In this situation where there's so much tactical volatility, so many swings in the eval, I'm just going to say the same thing to pretty much anyone at this stage. Just spend time on tactics training, and it'll help you improve a lot. I think that'll really be helpful. And thank you very much for sending the game. Please send in more WoW CIA. Maybe we can take a little bit more look at your opening theory. I think your opening theory here is great. The London system works well. I think it's a great fit for you. It's fundamentally good, fundamentally strong as shown by engine analysis. And, beyond that, once it gets into a tactical situation here, so basically after C3, I'm just going to be reading out the engine output as would any, master in my situation. So I can't really help that much. That's the main thing. The next step for you, and I really think it'll be helpful to you, is just go to a tactics trainer, preferably a free one, preferably like Chess Tempo or Lee Chess, or if you can get an old copy of CT-ART, that's a great program. Whatever tactics trainer you most prefer, and basically use that to improve. I think if you do that for an hour or two a day for a month, that will really help. and basically that will be good for you, Woe. I think that's your quickest route to improvement. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for sending the game. I really appreciate it, and feel free to send as many more as you like. I'm happy to go over opening prep. I think that's a place where I can add value. But these heavily tactical situations, I'm just reading engine output as is every other person. Your next step is improve your tactics, and then I might be able to add more value by making improvements based on positional play. I'm still super happy to go over your openings. I think that's your next step forward. It's not something that someone can sell you, right? It's just something that you have to do, and it will provide the best way for you to improve. It is something that has to be done on. It's like weightlifting. I mean, it's something that you just have to sort of do. There's no shortcuts. It's just tactical training. Every master has spent 1,000 hours at least on tactical training, and if you put the time in on that, you'll see good returns quickly. Like when I see C3, I'm just like, okay, this is just tactics. It's just a one move tactic that gets missed. That's where all your games are getting decided, so that's where I'd spend time. Anyways, thanks very much for being here, Woe. Thank you very much for sending in the games. Send in as many as you like. I'm moving towards a more instructional format, starting Monday. I'm gonna try to make it about 50-50 instruction game analysis, and I think that could really be helpful. The highest priority for you is tactics, but in terms of free chess lessons, we're moving more in an instructional format and away from game analysis, and I think that'll be helpful. But thank you very much for sending the game. Send as many as you'd like, Woe, and I really appreciate having you here. Thanks for being here. And thank you for contributing material for the stream to go through. All right, on to the next one. This is game number 5. Here we go. It's Spotkins' game. Spotkins is playing as black. And let's take a look. Spotkins plays is this the Owens? I forgot if it's Owens or whether they call this something else. If it's e4, b6 immediately, I know it's Owens, but okay, so this is French defense knight variation. I think it's just French defense. It's like miscellaneous French defense. B6 is the third most common move here. So I don't know. I think it's fine. I don't know. I mean, it's fine. It's not great. I've seen masters play b6. The only thing about b6 is that it doesn't pass my criteria for keeping your opening. Maybe English defense. I don't know. Anyways, when you're looking at this, I guess what I would say is, b6 is you can play it. The main point is that chess is fun. The first thing is make sure chess stays fun for you. If it's fun for you to play 2b6, then by all means play 2b6. The only thing is that I'm sort of, I've come up with this criteria for removing things from your opening repertoire, and b6 doesn't pass this test. This opening repertoire question, it's basically about it's about two things. So if you're in a situation and you have this opening book in front of you, if your opening repertoire move is played less than 1% of the time, and in this case it is, b6 is played less than 1%. B6 is played less than 1% of the time. So 64 games out of about 125,000. So well less than 1% of the time. And if there's a swing of more than 0.5 against you relative to the best move, so here d5 is 0.07 and b6 is 0.84. So there's a swing of more than 0.5. So this doesn't pass the opening repertoire test that I set up. Now, it's just my test, so it's not like it's a decisive test. But I do think that it's a good test for evaluating whether or not openings should be in your repertoire. It's a good guideline, at least. So b6 here on knight f3, e4 versus e6. might be worth reconsidering just based on the fact that it doesn't pass the objective test that I've laid out. Yeah. So d4 b6, I think here, I mean, this actually doesn't, this passes that test. You know, basically b6 here, you know, is played less than 1% of the time, but the eval difference is only about 0.3. So the English defense immediate 1b6 against d4, or d4 b6. This does actually pass that test. It's here where it fails. But again, this is just yeah. So we can try that too. Let's look. If this fails that test, then maybe I'll consider it, because I do think English isn't a very playable game, so maybe it shouldn't be passing that test. But anyways, d4 b6. Interesting. Okay, this is the first opening where it's actually that test that no, okay, so it's still fine. I think. It depends. So this equals out to about 0.86, say. Interesting. So d4 b6 is 0.86. Let's see d4. This is gonna be right on the edge. It's a little bit pedantic, but knight f6. If it's over 0.36, then it technically, or if it's below 0.36 add, it ends up failing the test. I'm not sure. Maybe it should fail a test. Maybe it's objectively not that good. But yeah, so here it's, yeah, so it's 0.4. So it technically passes the test. Anyways, this test is a super rough estimate. It's a guideline and not a rule. But yeah, so just so we know, the English opening. So the best response here, I think, is knight f6, right? Or I mean, maybe it's not. So the English defense might fail this test. I'm just curious, just because, let's see, is it actually playable at, it's a somewhat unusual opening. Interesting, surprise weapon. I don't know, it's probably not playable at Grandmaster level, but it might actually be something to think about as how rigidly to adhere to that opening guideline. Anyways, interesting situation. So b6 fails that test, but can you play it? Yeah, you probably can't play it. Bishop b7, bishop to b4, d3, bishop takes, pawn takes, and basically here, yeah, things are looking okay. White's getting a pretty good edge here. And then there's a big error by white. Let's see what this was. Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. So basically, white hung the rook to knight to a4. Good tactic, good tactical vision to see this. Yeah, knight a4 wins that rook. So or wins both rooks. Sorry. Knight a4, king over, and then rook takes both books, or both rooks over nothing. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, so good work. Good work. Interesting situation for black. Yeah, good tactics. Good tactics, Spotkins, for sure. So f6 is an error. But yeah, good tactics. Great job winning this game, Spotkins. Definitely value of tactics training. I mean, it shows, you know, if you know, you may have seen this tactic regardless, but if you've been doing tactics training, it really feels good to see these types of situations, because they definitely demonstrate the value of tactics training. Like, you know, in this situation, this isn't the easiest tactic in the world to see. I mean, you know, you're in this situation, and it basically turns this game, which is a very good position for white, into a position for black. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Limestone. I'm glad that's available. So yeah, so knight a4. king back to the 1 file, king to c1, rook takes, and black basically wins 2 pieces for basically wins 2 rooks off of a single tactical maneuver. This makes, it decides the game basically, right? The eval goes from +5 to -10, so a 15-point swing. I mean, these tactics are extremely important to see. So great job seeing that, Spotkins. Won you the game, and yeah, gives you kind of a good thing to look forward to. With enough tactical study, you'll see those very frequently. Anyways, b6, bishop b7. Yeah, that was that. No, that was awesome. That was great. Great play. Yeah. d4, f6 is an error. F6, f6 is a positional error, so I think I can talk about this one a bit. Basically, the problem with f6. So you understand this pawn structure, and I think you're playing for the right thing here, right? This pawn structure is the French pawn structure. And in the French pawn structure, one of the key aspects of it is basically, as black, trying to undermine the pawns on d4 and e5. If you can successfully do that, it tends to be equal or better for black. So in general, undermining this pawn structure, definitely a good idea. f6 is an undermining move here, which is good. But the issue with it is it allows a tactical strike in this particular case. On f6, you're basically allowing e takes f6 to be played, creating a backwards a backwards e pawn, and basically a backwards e pawn on an open file, and that's weak, right? So yeah, I would say queen takes f6 here is probably better, but this undermining move should come later. c5 is also available as a potential undermining move. That may be a better way to undermine this pawn structure. Knight h6, I think this ends up being, knight h6 I think is better. Can white play h3 first to put the knight on in an awkward square? Yeah. The thing about this is, I think that black should be heading towards queenside castling now anyways. This, I know it's a little bit awkward here, but I think that that castling queenside provides better chances for black. This queenside is relatively hard for white to get into, especially with these doubled c pawns. White can't really pawn storm that effectively on the queenside. So I think queen e7 castles, that will end up being better for black. So I think knight h6 and then bishop takes h6 and then pawn takes h6. That ends up in a better situation for black. So f6 is an undermining move. It's thematically consistent with the French, so it's fine. Or the idea behind it is fine. It just allows a tactical problem with this backward pawn on an open file for the knight and potentially the rook to attack. So I would revisit h6 there. On d4, sure. And yeah, I think basically white's fine. But overall, this has now turned into a tactical situation, as opposed to a, basically a tactical situation as opposed to a strategic position. So, yeah, getting those 2 rooks, monster tactic there, really shows the value of being booked up on your tactics. And yeah, keep at the tactical study, Mikey. I think you're really headed in the right direction. I think this is really, a demonstrate, whether or not this is related to recent tactical study, I don't know, but it definitely demonstrates the value of tactical study. You swing the game 15 points on something that could have on an opportunity that could have potentially been missed. So, so finding that type of thing is really important. Really a good thing for black to do. So in terms of evaluating this game, there's a number of tactical missteps, but this one is a positional misstep, I think. I think basically allowing this isolated pawn, or basically this backward pawn, to be on an open file and open to attack is an error for black. After that, the position gets pretty tactical. And by the way, you asked. Someone asked a very good question, which was, can White play H3? Philion. Sorry to get distracted on that question, Philion. The question is on H3. Can H3 be played by White? Yes. The thing about it, though, is that I think from a strategic perspective, the knight gets forced back to H6, the bishop takes H6, pawn takes H6, and this does mess up Black's pawn structure for sure. The thing about it, though, is that it makes the choice very easy for Black to castle queenside after this. That's what I would do as a Black. Basically just play queen e7, knight d7, and then castle queenside. With the kingside this open, you don't want to castle kingside. And yeah, you're right. Black is probably going to lose one of the rook pawns. Those pawns are extremely weak and hard to defend. But yeah, I think you just castle queenside. So this pushing the knight to h6 isn't really as much of an issue as it could potentially be if White had the ability to pawn storm with his queenside pawn structure. Anyways, interesting situation. I think this all sort of made sense. Knight to d7 is probably better than knight to g4 too. Knight to g8 is also probably a little bit better. The knight just gets a little bit dislocated here, and it's forced to come back through h6, which will allow these doubled rook pawns. So I think two things to improve here. Knight d7 is one. Or knight d7 or knight g8 is one. And then once the knight is on g4, I think you can allow knight to h6. And I think knight to h6 is better than f6, because with f6 you're undermining your own e6 pawn, placing a backward pawn on an open on a file that you're opening for white. That's why I think that those two are errors. And then, and it ends up turning into a very tactical situation. This knight sack probably is fine. But anyways, it's all in the tactical zone now here. And the good news is, you found the move that won, right? I mean, you found a move that swung the game by 15 points. It was a tactical move, and a really high percentage of games that you play are going to be decided in that way. So that's my recommendation. Keep at the tactical study. That's the biggest priority for you at the point you're at now in this in this situation. Knight to a4, awesome. King back, rook takes, and you win both the rooks. Awesome. You figured out the winning tactic. Great. Yeah. Oh, after Black played f6. Good question. Let's take a look. But yeah, Mikey, I think you're really I think this is a great demonstration of the value of tactical study. I think that you're headed in the right direction, and at the level you're at, you're gonna see moves like knight a4 more and more frequently against your opponents. And I think that if you capitalize on those opportunities, it's really gonna help you win more games. Can the knight play back to h6 after this? Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely, he definitely can, Aphelion. The thing about this tactic is it actually is sort of a sound one. I mean, if you look at the comparison between the eval of knight to h6, which is 4.3, and the value of knight takes f2, which is 4.59, it's basically sound. I mean, it's 0.2 worse in a situation where you're already down by 4 points. So that's not a move that I have a lot of problem with, actually, as Black. I think you do have... It is basically a sound tactic. I mean, it's not shifting the eval against Black in any way. The error in this game was playing f6 and allowing this open pawn on this open file. But the actual knight takes f2 tactic was good. This one is, the difference is only 0.3 versus the objectively best move, and it provides practical compensation as well. So knight takes f2 might have been the right move here, which is kind of interesting. In winning the g3 and the fork here. I like it. I actually like knight f2 after f6. But yes, the number 2 option and the less aggressive option was knight to h6 in this situation, which is also just fine. White's up by a considerable amount, but knight h6 is also completely fine here. But what's funny is that knight takes f2 is actually a sound tactic. Anyways, very interesting game, Mikey. The thematic consideration on this game B6, I don't know. I mean, if you like playing the English opening, then sure. But it is worth noting that it fails the test that I've laid out on the the soundness of games in your opening repertoire. Again, it's just my test. It's not it's not the determinant of the opening. It's just a guideline that I use. It doesn't pass based on that guideline. But then I think you get a great game out of this. You really end up in a situation where you're getting great tactical opportunities, and then you capitalize on them. Awesome. Great way to play. Keep up the tactics. You're going to see more and more opportunities. The opportunities are going to become more and more visible to you as your tactical strength improves. So if you put in the time on tactics at the level that you're at, you're going to see great returns, I think. Cool. Thanks for sending it, Mikey. Please send as many as you'd like. I really appreciate you sending games for the stream, and it makes them that much better to just have a lot of games to draw from and a lot of stuff to look at. But once it's a tactical position, no masters better than the computer at this one. I can't help as much as the computer analysis can. I can tell you what the computer analysis is saying, but to be fair, I think it's sort of analysis that you can do on your own. I'm happy to do it, but I'm not going to add any value. All right, Gecko's turn. At knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. All right, cool. Italian game. I like the Italian game a lot as white. It's kind of the situation that I'm always hoping for. It turns the chess game into a chess game, and then you can outplay your opponent from a relatively equal position. Castles, knight f6, d3, h6. And then I'm thinking things like h3, g4, g5 here could be good. c3, d5. Okay. This is pretty aggressive for black. I'm not sure this is a playable opening. It sort of looks like a what would you say? So d5, pawn takes d5, knight takes. It sort of looks like a good opportunity for white. But overall, I guess d5 fails that criteria that I was talking about. Let's just look at the situation. In this situation, d5 is played less than 1% of the time, and my guess is that it's going to fail on that criteria. It moves 1.7 points away from the favored player here. So the combination of these two, I think, is not particularly strong for white. Not particularly strong for black. I think d5 is a tactical error. Here, queen to b3 looks really dangerous for black. The threat on this knight is hard to deal with, and the indirect threat on f7. Also, it pins the bishop to the defense of queen b7, so queen b3 is a winning move for white. Anyways, bishop c4, bishop c5, d3, and white's looking good. 3 points here, and white's looking just solid. Queen b3 is the move. Knight takes e4 is not as strong as queen b3. Knight takes e4 is a tactical error. Queen b3 was the tactical move that really disrupts black's situation. And then black plays bishop takes f2 for some reason. But overall, I don't think there's anything particularly good here. Rook takes, g3. Yeah, just think white's good. Yeah, nice. Okay, good win for white. Let's go through this again. Pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, sure. Knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes. And here, anything that pins the queen, or basically anything that pins the knight is good. Rook e2 is good, queen e2 is good, but this knight is pinned, and you should be winning this knight. Queen h5 doesn't exploit the pin well enough. Queen e7 is a defensive resource. So, anyways, the thing that I would say here is, just basically capitalize as white. C3, fine, d5, pawn takes. Knight takes is sound, but this quickly turns into a very tactical position. The main improvement for so basically, you know, this is a normal game. Nothing really going on here. D3, fine. I like the way that you played this opening. I played this opening myself. It makes a lot of sense. Takes you into an equal position. And then what you want to do here is just basically outplay your opponent. Your opponent makes a big tactical error with e takes d5, you take, knight takes. White's up by 3 or so points here, so in very good shape. And then basically the tactical put-away shot is queen to b3. Knight takes e5 is interesting, but with enough tactical training, queen to b3 will become a pretty clear move to make. Queen to b3, and you're up by 3 pawns here. Knight takes e5, and basically, you know, you forced... See, the thing about this is I think it's a demonstration of the value of playing a sound opening. You know, you've basically played in a solid way. Regardless of what black does, you're going to be slightly better, right? You haven't given up the initiative as white. But you forced your opponent to play chess. And the thing is, at, you know, some level, if you force your opponent to play chess, you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have good chances, you know, if your fundamentals are good. So knight takes, rook takes, queen h5 is good. But basically white's looking fine. You know, white's up by 4 points. You've forced your opponent to play chess, and your opponent you've played better chess than they have in the middle game. So so ideas like queen b3 I think could be a good idea. When white played h6, yes, I also think h6 is a strategic error for black. These types of moves, especially if you've already castled, but in any position really, I'm just never really sold on playing moves like h6 proactively. The thing about h6 is it just doesn't have enough, it's not purposeful enough. H6 basically creates a situation in which, you know, h6 basically creates a situation in which, you know, this is the only purpose. The only purpose of h6 is to prevent knight to g5. The other moves for black, like d6, castles, bishop g4, for example, those moves all basically create a situation in which, you know, black is looking, you know, basically they're more purposeful moves for black. The scope of h6 is too narrow. That's the problem. So h6 and g5 is held. D6 and you know, moves like bishop to g4 become available. But yeah, white's doing just you know, basically white's doing just fine here. This you know, h6 is a narrow move for black to play in a situation in which he should still be developing. E4, e5, all this looks you know, all this looks fine. d5, e takes d5. Knight takes d5, and then queen b3 is the move. Queen b3, and white's fine. So tactical training will help you see queen b3 more easily. But overall, I really like this opening. Honestly, I think you've played the right opening. And if you can play a solid opening like this, you know, the chances that black makes an error that you can capitalize on are reasonably high until a pretty high level. So yeah, in terms of looking at h6, is there a faster aggressive move for white to play here? No, I think here, I'm not a fan of c3 structures. I prefer knight to c3 generally. Knight to c3, bishop e3, queen d2 is how I normally play this opening. But c3 is just fine. It's fundamental. You know, c3 will push in, you know, basically your, you know, you'll have the opportunity to play d4. But yeah, you'll have the opportunity to play d4 based on c3. That makes complete sense from an intuitive perspective. Bishop e6 doesn't prevent... No, because here, on bishop e6, queen takes b7. And this loses material for black. And it creates a whole bunch of problems. You know, basically knight de7 becomes black's best tactical play. And on knight to a5, white's crushing with queen to b5. So yeah, really good question, Gecko. Yeah, super happy to go through it. Like, if you ever have questions, just ask them and I'll answer them. But pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b3. You know, this knight is both pinned to the, you know, to prevent bishop takes f7 and undefended. So overall, just a really rough position for black. Bishop e6, queen takes b7, winning a pawn, and the best move becomes knight to e7, which, you know, this position gets really ugly, like really good for you know, really good for white. Yeah, for sure, and that's a reasonable thing to think about. You know, and it can happen in some situations. It happens in high level games. But the main point is, you know, this position. So when you see this position, so assuming you're in this position for white, the goal is to have good enough tactical vision to basically see on bishop e6, you know, is queen b7 going to trap and dislocate your queen? In some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't. In this case, queen b7 is a move that's 2 points better than any other move for white. And the reason why is because if you are able to calculate through this tactically, you can see that, you know, on queen takes b7, the knight is getting attacked, and because the knight is getting attacked, you know, a normal defensive move or a normal move that could be trapping, like rook to b8, could be replaced by queen takes c6. That's the idea there. Yeah, so rook b8, queen takes c6, and white's in good shape. That's my suggestion. Yeah, queen takes c6 is you know, is the play that saves queen b. You know, basically is the move that immediately justifies queen takes b7. So that's the answer. The point is to have good enough tactical vision that you can see that on you know, on queen b3, bishop e6, queen takes b7, forks c6 and a8, and white's good. It is often, yeah, it is often poisoned. You know, there are many situations in which the pawn can be poisoned. The important thing is, you know, there's not really a better method of doing it. You know, I don't think you can learn opening theory well enough to know exactly when the pawn isn't or is not poisoned. I can just say in this situation, the pawn is definitely not poisoned. You know, the queen b7 is completely sound and playable here. So, you know, with queen takes b7, the pawn is, you know, basically not poisoned, and it is in fact a great resource for white. So the important point is to get your tactical vision good enough that you can play queen takes b7 freely, and yeah. So in this situation, queen takes b7 is the move. With queen takes b7, you're good. Yeah, queen to b5 looks good. Good fork. Good stuff. So that's my suggestion there, queen b5. But here, yeah, queen b5, king gets forked, pieces get forked, and yeah, nothing really to do there, to be honest, Aphelion. Looks like a win for me. This fork, yeah, this fork should work. So in this particular case, you know, I think there's no really better strategy than just superior tactical vision to know when things are and are not poisoned. But yeah, queen takes b7, nice, good call, good for white. I mean, I would say that it's a tactical position once you get on the concept of queen takes b7. Yeah, no. I mean, usually, you know, it's a tough, you know, it's a tough situation. Knowing when that pawn is not poisoned, I think, is based on tactical considerations. So yeah, queen b3 is superior to knight takes e5 with the freeness of queen takes b7 available to you. Anyways, interesting situation for white, and yeah, that's the strategic play, or that's the play. Queen b3 puts white way ahead here. So yeah. Good job by white. Thanks for sending that, and yeah, I think, you know, once it turns into a you know, once it turns into a tactical situation, I think you're in pretty good shape. Pawn takes, knight takes, you know, queen b3 should beat black here. And after this, yeah, looks fine. White's just up. So good stuff. Yeah, I don't know how much, you know, I don't think I can add that much value on tactical situations, to be honest, but overall, looks good. Seems good. And nice. So yeah, queen b3 over knight takes e5, and I think white's winning. Anyways, I like the way that you played the Italian game here. Italian game, I think, is good. I think, it's solid. It encouraged your opponent to play some pretty unsound moves, and you won. Yeah, nice. Good job, El Gecko. Thank you very much for sending the game. I like the opening play, but again, that's my bias. Yeah, everybody, yeah, I really appreciate all that. Thanks everyone very much for being here. Thank you all very much for sending games. This is the new schedule, this 8 a.m. Eastern, yeah, feel free to send as many games as you like. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm switching over to 3 lessons and 3 game slots, as opposed to usually it's 1 lesson and 5 game slots. I'm curious to see how this will go. I think it might be good, and I think it'll have material that will be helpful to everyone at once, more likely. Yeah, and it's 9:35 p.m. tonight. I'm doing that because I have a class that runs 6:30 to 9:30 some nights. Next stream is at 9:30 Eastern tonight. We'll see how that goes. I'm really curious to see if that's a good or bad stream time, but it works better for my current class schedule, so that's what I'm doing. Anyways, really appreciate you guys being here. Really appreciate you guys sending games. Send as many as you like, and yeah, really happy that you're here, and hope you guys have a good day. Next stream is at 9:35 p.m. Eastern tonight. I'll start advertising it that way, and I'm going to make some changes to the chess.com board, among other things, and anywhere else where the previous schedule is posted. But thanks all. Have a good Saturday, everyone, and yeah, thanks for being here. Have a good one. I'll see you later. Bye.